Good morning, Truth Seeker here, and this is a video I've been wanting to make for a little while, and it's regarding some Bible verses that I think on the surface appear to have merit, have benefit to human character development, but I think they're actually among the most dangerous Bible verses that we have. Now, often when Bible critics point out scriptures that people don't usually know that are there, they find the most shocking or the most egregious type of scriptures that they can find. And typically the critics and atheists, activists that I've seen who criticize Bible and the Bible verses and is the Bible good, point out verses like in the Old Testament where the two angels went into Sodom and Gomorrah to warn Lot of the impending destruction of those cities, and how these angels were being accosted by the city folk, men who wanted to rape the angels. And Lot, the godly man he was, offers his daughters in the place of these angels to protect the angels. That's not a realistic thing. I mean, I can't imagine the mindset where your own daughters are worth less to you than the integrity of two strangers, but these strangers being angels should be able to have protected themselves anyway. I mean, from the point of view of Lot, if he understood them to be angels and messengers of God, that God should be able to protect them at the least if they didn't have their own power. I see this Jehovah's Witness video where Sennacherib comes up against Jerusalem and King Hezekiah with 180,000 men, and one night this angel, and they use these special effects of this flaming angel at night who in an instant bounces around like a pinball to all the soldiers in the camp and kills everybody except Sennacherib. And if an angel is that powerful, then Lot shouldn't have had to worry about the angels at all. But even if he didn't understand what the power of an angel was supposed to be, at least he should have had enough faith in God to protect the angels. But instead he offers his daughters. And then those same two daughters, after they leave Sodom, after Lot's wife turns into a pillar of salt for turning back. Yeah, I have to agree, those are pretty bad scriptures, Then his daughters, thinking that it was the end of the world, get their father drunk and weakens his, I guess, moral his inhibition, and they sleep with him and both become pregnant by their father. And then there's a scripture of Judah sleeping with his brother's wife, and then there's the scripture of the two she-bears, the 42 children who making fun of Elisha as he's walking, and they're calling him bald, and I don't have much hair. I'm not going to send two she-bears to somebody, especially little kids who make fun of a prophet, to send two bears and kill all 42 children. That's just awful. Yes, there are some awful scriptures. There are awful scriptures. Was it Amalekites, where all of the Israelites in the wilderness were ordered to kill everybody by Moses except for the young girls who haven't had sex, so that they could keep them to... I mean, these are examples of scriptures that we think that are reflect the worst of the Bible, and agreeably, these certainly are not. Certainly, you don't hear about these things in church. I never did. Not growing up. You never heard any of these stories. There's even a scripture about the dog returning to vomit. One of the practices of the Bible students was to show how scriptural and Christian you are. We had these books called Daily Heavenly Mannas, which were a daily text, and on one page they were written by Charles Taze Russell. For each day of the year, there were 365 texts, usually a reprint article, an excerpt out of one of the reprint articles from the Watchtower. That was written by Charles Russell. And then another page was just lined for addresses, contacts. So you would bring your manna to convention or to a meeting, and you would put it, get somebody to sign it on their birthday, and so you could remember to send a birthday card or a Christmas card or whatever. Yes, Bible students celebrated Christmas. Most did. I mean, there were a few outliers here and there that were hardline against Christmas and holidays being pagan. But for the most part, the Bible students were pretty lax on the idea of celebrating. They didn't over-celebrate, but they didn't forbid it either. I mean, the Watchtower actually celebrated Christmas. The Bethel family celebrated Christmas until 1927, I think, was the last Christmas celebrated at the Watchtower. And that was 10 years into the judge's tenure as the president of the Watchtower. So for at least 10 years, he was pretty tolerant of these pagan things. But I guess New Light had shed new information about what should be and shouldn't be. Nobody should wear a beard, and nobody should celebrate holidays because they were all pagan, and nobody should celebrate anything human because we're all so sinful. And Rutherford was just an awful person. But as bad and as egregious as those scriptures may be, I think they're not the most dangerous scriptures. I think the most dangerous scriptures and Christian values are things that can do major damage to your psyche. And I'll give you an example. I remember when I was about 13 years old. That's a transition age, for a boy, a child into manhood. We're becoming sexually mature. And it's just natural to relieve any sexual tension that builds up, and masturbation. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly healthy. It's perfectly normal. And yet we had special meetings that were geared to us young people that called that a willful sin. Now, they differentiated between sin, because we were all born into sin according to Bible student doctrine, that we inherited sin from Adam and Eve and their wrongdoing. And we were all born into sin, so we couldn't help but sin. But there was a difference between being born into sin and sinning naturally, sin according to the flesh, and willful sin, which was like premeditated murder. There's a difference between manslaughter and premeditated murder. And manslaughter could be temporary insanity. You went into a rage and you didn't premeditate the person's demise, but you had an emotional event that was so strong that you couldn't control your actions, and you weren't really responsible for your actions to a full degree. It wasn't as if you had planned the person's death. And so the law distinguishes between premeditated and manslaughter. And so willful sin is sort of like that. Now, willful sin, I'm not really sure that there's any one scripture that really points to it, but the Bible students made a really big thing about it, because willful sin was the sin that got you into second death. Now, second death was oblivion. Bible students didn't believe in eternal torture as punishment. The concept of hell and hellfire was not a Bible student concept. Russell had become firmly convinced that the Bible didn't teach that there was a hell, and he couldn't believe that a loving God would have such a thing. But the idea of going into oblivion is just as, let's say, distressful to many people as the idea of, in fact, maybe even more so in a sense, because at least with the idea of hell, you have awareness. Awareness is your consciousness. And if you're aware and you're conscious, the human spirit always says, no matter how dire the situation is, the human spirit is such that if there is consciousness or life, there's always hope. Hope springs eternal. And that's true about human nature for the greater part. The idea of oblivion and never having a chance to come back in some ways is worse than the idea of being tortured eternally, because there's always the hope that maybe at some point, maybe there's a way out of the torture. But with oblivion, there is no way out. It's just eternally gone forever. And so while there's no torture involved, there's just the prospect of black emptiness. And that is pretty scary in its own right, especially the way the Bible students taught it and flaunted it. And in a sense, it was their analog to hell, to go into second death, to go into oblivion. Now, I think the Jehovah's Witnesses have a similar concept. They don't call it second death anymore. I think the second death to them is something a little more specific and occurs after the 1,000 years is done, and the period in which Satan is released out of the bottomless pit and goes and deceives the world. And then God sends fire upon them all and destroys all the dissenters to the kingdom. That is considered the second death by Jehovah's Witnesses because the scripture says it is. But the Bible students believe in a broader application of the second death, and they believe that those that were running for the high calling were subject to the second death. And so they would toss around this concept of second death as if, we were in jeopardy of second death. And the idea behind that is for those that were baptized and consecrated to the call, which was a call to be part of the 144,000 or the anointed class, they have given up their right. They've had Jesus' ransom sacrifice applied to them on their behalf. It's all very legalistic, and so therefore they're not entitled to a resurrection in the kingdom. They've given up that right by having the ransom applied to them for this better hope at this time before the kingdom is established. And those that are successful become part of the 144,000. And those that are not evil, but they're not deserving of the 144,000, went to the great company, which was a spiritual class, because they were like angels, because the reasoning behind that was that they had given up their earthly or human prospects for a resurrection. So God made a provision for them in heaven to be part of this great company. Later, Judge Rutherford changed that into an earthly class called the Jonadabs, and that's what the work is now, to get this great crowd gathered together who will pass into the 1,000 years. So that was a key change in doctrine that Judge Rutherford incorporated. That was a big change from what Russell taught. And then if you didn't qualify for either the 144,000 or the great company, the only alternative was second death. So the Bible students' doctrines were you always had this Damocles sword of second death hanging over your head. It was always there, always present, and there was always everybody was looking out for everybody else's welfare. In other words, they were getting their nose into everybody's business. And because it was a small religion, everybody did get into everybody else's business. And it was very cultish in that sense. And I know Lloyd Evans recently made a video about what's the difference between a cult and a religion, and he went through some definitions. I don't think you really necessarily need a definition. All you have to do is look at Bill Maher's movie Religulous. I recommend that. Actually, that movie, besides being funny, I love Bill Maher's humor. Besides being funny and a bit sarcastic, it also is right. I mean, when you look at the Catholic Church and you see the outfit the Pope wears, if I wore that outfit, people would look at me like, what's going on here? You know, the big pointy hat and the white robes with all the gold embroidering, and but I recommend Religulous, but I don't think that there's much difference between religion and a cult. I think that there are certain religions, I mean, even the Catholic religion. Look at the situation in Africa, and the Catholic religion is not promoting the use of condoms to protect against AIDS and other diseases that they are sexually transmitted. And they have epidemic situation in Africa, and yet the Catholic Church is saying just the opposite, that using condoms promoted AIDS. And so they were lying to the people and exacerbating an already bad problem in Africa with regard to AIDS. So as Christopher Hitchens points out very well, religion poisons everything. I love that book. I got the audio version of that book, God is Not Great. And it's actually read by Christopher Hitchens, and he's just got this marvelous accent. I just love a well-spoken Brit accent. It just sounds so musical in a way. It's an art form, and I don't think we Americans really have that eloquence down to an art form. But anyway, so there are the standard scriptures that show, the Bible for what it is. The 10 worst scriptures in the Bible. I think there was a video made about the 10 worst scriptures in the video, and the stock scriptures about the she bears and all that stuff. So, but actually, I think that the worst scriptures, the most dangerous scriptures, are also the most subtle scriptures in terms of the psychological effect that it has on people's minds. And I think this is where there's this cognitive dissonance. Now, cognitive dissonance is mostly thought of in terms of conflicting ideas, conflicting thoughts that are expressed in the scriptures, or let's say with concepts that we may believe are correct, and there's a conflict, and it creates a dissonance in our mind that causes confusion, and that's what religion does. It creates a confusion in our mind. But there's also emotional dissonance, because, and I think it's even worse, because scriptures tell you how you should look at yourself. Religion tells you you're good or you're bad, and typically they tell you you're inherently evil. that you were born into sin, and that you're basically evil, and that you had no control over it, and that you need forgiveness for your sins, and so it translates into you must forgive other people because you need forgiveness. And you got the scriptures that say, "He who's without sin, throw the first stone." Or, if you accuse your, neighbor of having a splinter in his eye, take a look at the log in your own. And, it's, you're evil, you're bad, you're evil, over and over, and hammered into you, and driven into you from the time you're born, and throughout your entire life in the religion. And it talks about your need for salvation, being saved from this sinful condition that you're in, that you are inherently sinful. And it really screws with your head. And there are circumstances in life where it really does do serious damage to people. For example, saying that it's a willful sin, or that you're sinful for masturbating. And I can remember that I was 20 years old. I mean, that one special study session we had when I was 13 years old stuck with me throughout my life, because it impressed me so strongly that was a willful sin, that I was putting myself in jeopardy, that the all-seeing God who sees everything, nothing's hidden from him. He's like Santa Claus. He knows what you are thinking. He knows when you're awake. It's Santa Claus, I think, was modeled after God, and our concept of God. And God is this all-knowing, all-seeing, pervasive entity that's always there, and he knows what you're doing, and he's going to judge you someday for that. And so you're always living with this guilt and with this shame, because you're following nature. You're following what comes natural. The Bible teaches things, religion teaches things that are unnatural for us. And it creates this it's not only just cognitive dissonance, but emotional dissonance, where we know at some level we're not evil, but at the same time we're taught that we are evil. And it's reinforced over and over and over again. I remember when I wanted to make a change in my life, that I had this few-year bout with rebellion in the Bible students' religion. And I went down to Florida, where my cousins, who never got in trouble, they were the model Bible students. And I thought, changing my environment and moving down there and being with them would straighten me out. And having this change in the environment would be a good thing for me. So I went down there several times in a several-month period to locate a job and to sort of set myself up to move down into that area so I could be with them and have this good influence around me. And while I was down there on one of these occasions, we had a youth outing where about 15 or 20 of us young people went to a park and had a picnic, a day picnic. Now, this is a long time ago. I mean, I was 22 years old at the time. And I remember going out into the lake by myself. I went out for a swim. And my cousin's husband came out. Now, he is one of these kinds of guys that is everybody's Dutch uncle, and he had to go out there and make me know that, that I'm being scrutinized, and and what he said was, the jury is still out on you. And that made me feel awful, because here I am trying. I mean, I thought my presence there and me being with them was a demonstrative act of contrition, really, of trying to make an effort to do what was right. And he was warning me that, the jury is still out on me. I mean, I had this black sheep reputation at the time. And so, that bugged me. I mean, that really did bug me. I thought that was a little self-righteous on his part. But at the same time, being a young person who was always told that they were inherently evil, I felt badly about myself that I had this reputation. I need this coffee, boy, it's really good. So, anyway, the reason for all of that, I think, comes back to some of these scriptures. And some of these scriptures, they may on the surface appear right and righteous, but I think they're among the most dangerous scriptures. People say, we follow the Bible because we want the moral codes. We want to do what's right. The Bible and being Christian gives us, following Jesus's precepts, gives us a moral compass by which we can navigate through life properly. But I think many of these things that are right are detrimental to us in many ways, especially with regard to our self-esteem. And so I think I'll go to some of what I think are the worst scriptures in the Bible. And I think they're in what they call the Beattitudes. They're found in Matthew. I don't know what the hell a beatitude is. I have to look that up sometime, but I should know after all those years as a Christian what beatitude means. In fact, actually, I think I'm going to look it up. They're probably going to say a set of scriptures in Matthew, but anyway, there might be a specific beatitude. Yeah, I know what they are, beatitudes, but what does beatitude mean? Beatitudes are 8 blessings recounted by Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew. Each is a proverb-like proclamation without narrative. 4 of the blessings also appear in the Sermon on the Plain with Luke. So there's... here we go. Thus, blessed are the poor, and appears in Latin as Beati Paupers Spiritu. The Latin noun beatitude was coined by Cicero to describe a state of blessedness. So if you can do these things, you're in a state of blessedness. Okay, so that's what beatitude means. And they are, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom in heaven. And blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Okay, great, wonderful. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And, there's nothing wrong with humility. I think that it's an attribute, definitely. Being humble is an attribute. I mean, one of the when let's talk about the opposite end of the spectrum is narcissism and psychopathy, where the person is totally centered in on their own interests, and they don't realize any of their limitation. I think it's good to have a healthy sense of self-esteem of what you can do and what you're capable of and what you're able to do, and to be able to promote that, but in a healthy way, not look how great I am. And narcissism is just the opposite. It is look at me, I'm the best there is, and everybody else is dirt. So I don't see anything wrong, and that's the problem with these. That's what makes these things subtle, because they start out with principles that don't seem on the surface to be bad, because they've got merit to them. Blessed are the meek. And blessed are they which hunger and thirst after righteousness. Now, there's nothing wrong at all about wanting to do right to other people, and to behave in a way in society that is, we're social creatures, and we find that when we do good things for other people, it makes us happy. And it's helping others, and there's something good about that. There's something that in our evolution was beneficial to our society, our survival, as we practiced these characteristics of doing good to other people, and doing what's right, and not trying to hurt others. So this is kind of sneaky, because then it starts getting into things here that are not healthy, and it's a sneaky transition into stuff that isn't healthy at all for us. And it says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, and blessed are the peacemakers." Now, of course, the rewards, he said, we can contend, because there's no evidence that any of these rewards, I want to be good to people because it's the right thing to do. It makes me feel good that I've done something nice for somebody else. I don't do it because I think I'm going to heaven, because I'm going to do good things. In fact, that could be the wrong motivation for me to do good. I may not feel it at all that I want to do good to this person, but I've got to do it in order for me to get my heavenly reward. I mean, it can have a wrong. It can give us wrong motives for doing the right thing. We should be doing these things because we're human. We should be doing these things because it's the right thing to do. Blessed are they which hunger and thirst after righteousness. And we shouldn't be doing it because there's a goal in mind that we're going to attain. And I think too many times Christians have this phony attitude of righteousness, and also can develop a sense of self-righteousness for doing good things to people. But the motivation isn't right, because they think they're going to get some great reward with God as a result. So, I think that, when we really look at these things, they can be dangerous. And blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Now, I don't understand that one. I don't think we should necessarily put ourselves into trouble. I mean, this is where Christians and certain Christian sects, like the Bible students and the Jehovah's Witnesses, they develop this persecution complex because they believe that there's going to be some benefit to them if they do get persecuted. And so they look for means by which they are. And so they begin to look at the world as a bad and sinful place, and a place ruled by Satan, and that it's out to get you, and you should do right to people who are motivated wrongly. There's something warped about that. There's something really warped about that whole scenario, because it gives you an outlook. This is why the term in the Bible students and the term used by the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm sure other Christian sects also use this term, for anybody who's not within the fold of their sect, the world is a pejorative. It is a very negative term. If you're called worldly, oh my goodness, then you've lost all your hope for heaven if you are a worldly person. And, if you leave the faith, you're a worldly person. And they use this shame and they use this guilt because it's an us and them zero-sum game. They don't look at it as a game, but that's really what it comes down to. And it promotes this self-righteous attitude that's so syrupy, sickening, that is phony. When somebody wants to do good, they should feel it from their heart, not because they think that they're going to get some reward from God. And then it goes on, blessed are ye when men revile you and persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my name's sake. Again, it's persecution for your Christian your Christian beliefs and putting on your Christian characteristics and flaunting them. Wearing them on your arm sleeve. I'm a Christian. And there are people out there like that. You know the kind. You found them in church. They're there all the time. The self-righteous. They're really hard to deal with, for me, from a psychological point of view. And then he goes on, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It's good for nothing and to be cast out. So here he's telling you that if you don't do these things, God has no use for you. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. And so he's telling us to let our light shine before men and so on. But then he goes on, and this is what bothers me. You see, we watch these crime shows. There are all different kinds on television, but we kind of enjoy them because you see the investigative methods, you see the forensics that are used, and it's just interesting to see what human beings can do to one another when passion's involved, and raw gut passion. And so many times, over and over again, there are circumstances where, if, the victim who's been murdered, most of these are murder shows and murder victims, they have family and they have others that are close to them, friends, and they interview these friends and family, and they talk about the heartache of not knowing what happened, when their loved one went missing, and the months that they endured, and the losing of hope, and it just awful to see what people have gone through, and as a result of, let's say, a psychopath's action. Somebody who doesn't value human life the way that the majority of people do, and then these people are caught and tried and then sentenced, and usually there's some harsh sentence, serving their life in jail, or in rare cases, the death penalty. And so often, you see the relatives, the close relative, the mother, the father, get up and make a testimony before the judge during the sentencing procedures, and they'll say, "I've forgiven this person." And why? Well, they think that they're being Christian. My faith requires me to forgive this person. And, this person who had done such an egregious thing, they took the life of a loved one, the life of a child, and they hurt them. And it's irreparable. And this person often doesn't feel remorse, doesn't want forgiveness, and for some reason, these people think it's a good thing for them to forgive this person, that there's some benefit. Now, the emotional, there's some emotional blackmailing going on here with religion that causes people to feel that they have to forgive this individual for their healing. And I think that's entirely off base, way off base. And it's funny because on Friday, what made me think about this is because on Friday I got talking with my counselor. And at the end of my session, we've got on the subject of forgiveness, this unconditional, one-sided forgiveness, and how wrong that is, regardless of the fact that Christians teach this, that you must forgive all the time, no matter what, regardless of the fact that a person has not shown any remorse. In fact, they may even have gotten pleasure that they've created such tremendous pain and hurt so many people. I mean, one person can create a lot of pain that affects a lot of people, and it's not psychologically healthy. There's an emotional dichotomy, the emotional dissonance there. I must forgive. I must forgive this person because my religion tells me I must forgive. And it says here, and we get these things from these scriptures, that how many times in Matthew 18, how many times Peter asks, Lord, how many times shall we forgive our brother? And he says 7 times, and Jesus says 70 times 7. And sounded like, you always forgive, regardless. But I firmly believe that it's unhealthy to forgive a person who doesn't want forgiveness. Jesus in these Beattitudes says, besides, if your right eye offend thee, pluck it out. If your right hand offends thee, why your right hand? Most people are right-handed. Cut it off, and you know what that means. That is often used by Christian teachers. That refers to masturbation and self-abuse. They call it. They called it when I was a kid. Self-abuse. If your hand offends you, causes you to sin, then cut it off. That's a pretty rash measure to do something that's, that was one of the things that was so distressing to me, because you couldn't help but do it. It's a perfectly natural thing. But then at the same time, you're told that God's watching you and that this is wrong. And this is the kind of emotional dissonance that occurs, not only cognitive but emotional, because it rips your emotions apart, and you feel this overwhelming guilt and overwhelming shame. And we get these things where if a man sues you in court for your shirt, give him your coat, and all of these things, and that is just not. You see, that's how sneaky, that's how subtle, because it starts out with some principles that are good. And then he moves into territory here, unjustified, unsupported, that poisons people's emotions and causes them to Jesus was no train. He was just this guy walking around, if he ever existed at all, telling these obscure parables. And some of this stuff is actually just downright wrong for human development. Now, granted, there is something to working out the anger, but there's nothing wrong with feeling anger towards somebody who's done something awful to you, to be angry at them. But to then find a way to cope with that anger is a whole different matter than forgiveness. Because if that person doesn't want forgiveness, he shouldn't get forgiveness, or she. But the thing is that if it becomes obsessive and the anger overwhelms you, that's not healthy either. And there are ways of dissipating that anger. There are ways and means to cope with life circumstances so that it doesn't ruin your life, that a circumstance doesn't overwhelm and overtake everything, become obsessive about the matter. I just had a little problem with memory here. I had to clean off some stuff from my hard drive. But what I was saying was, if an interaction with somebody has done something to you that's really, really awful, and if they don't want forgiveness, it's not healthy to force yourself to forgive this person. It's just not healthy, and it's natural to feel anger. Anger is a natural emotion. If these emotions weren't beneficial to us in some way, then we wouldn't have them. But we do have these things. And if an idea or concept runs contrary to what is a natural response in us, it can create both cognitive and emotional dissonance and can be very unhealthy for you. It can cause real psychological problems and neuroses. And this was some of our discussion that I had with my counselor, who's really deals with this on a day-to-day basis. This is his job, is dealing with people with emotional crisis, and in most cases it's because of the things that we've been taught from the time that we were children into our adult years, and we carry these ideas that are emotional and mental poison. And these conflicts that are in us, what we feel with what we think we should be feeling, run contrary to one another, and they cause us mental and emotional health problems. Now, as I was mentioning before about obsessing, it's not a healthy thing to obsess. I mean, look, most things that people do with one another can be passed off with and dealt with in healthy ways on your own. But there are times, there are circumstances and events and things that happen to us in our lives that are so powerful and so huge that we can't necessarily deal with it in a healthy way on our own. And in those circumstances, it's probably best to get professional help, because to obsess over something is not healthy either. But getting over anger, moving on with your life, and learning how to cope and learning how to deal with things is not necessarily forgiving a person, especially if that person doesn't want forgiveness. Why should they be forgiven? It doesn't mean that you have to live your life obsessed about that person, but there's nothing, no law of nature that says that you should forgive this person. And I don't think it's necessarily healthy to do so, to feel compelled that I have to somehow. The idea of forgiveness kind of carries the concept of restoration, restoring a relationship, or restoring an interaction with somebody. I mean, that's basically most of our social interaction are with people we know, friends, family, and others, and they're the ones where we run into these little conflicts. And to feel that we must always forgive because blood's thicker than water, or because it's the Christian thing to do. No, not if they don't feel remorse and forgiveness for it. But at the same time, we move on with our life. We find ways that it doesn't interfere with our function, with our ability to move on in life, and we can learn to find ways to get past. And if we can't get past it, if we do become obsessive about it, it dominates our life. We feel nothing but anger in us, or disdain, or hatred, or whatever emotion that may be instilled by a circumstance. There's professional help to help us work through these things, and these guys are trained. Not that every, it's like doctors. Not all doctors are good. Not all mechanics are good. You may have to find somebody who resonates with your personality. You know, not everybody's the same, but they can help you. They can help you so that you're not carrying a resentment or not carrying, carrying a resentment in the sense that it dominates your life, that it overwhelms your actions, has changed the course of your life. But to have this idea of carte blanche forgiveness, to see somebody on television forgive a psychopath because it's the Christian thing to do after they murdered their child, bewilders me. I don't understand it. I can't understand it, and I don't believe it's healthy, and I don't believe that the Christian thing to do is the right thing to do. And so, but anyway, these are my own personal experiences. This is my own personal opinion. I am not a psychological professional, but I have had a lot of psychological help to help me deal with the poison that was constantly poured into my brain when from childhood into my adult years, trying to live a Bible student life. And eventually the dissonance nearly destroyed me, nearly destroyed my family, in a very real way. And it wasn't until I found out that the whole thing was screwed, that the whole thing was just bunk, that I began to get healthy again. And I tell you, the last 15 to 20 years have been the best years of my life. And with my family, with my wife. In fact, actually, some of the very first arguments that I had with my wife were over these matters about forgiveness and about these Christian principles, because she actually, while her father was a Bible student, they were somewhat isolated, and so she didn't really understand the Bible student culture very well. And so when we got married, these conflicts arose between us because I was thoroughly embedded, thoroughly infused with these ideas, and these ideas that were deeply embedded in me, and to the point where they formed my sense of who I was and how I valued myself. And that's a very deeply embedded sense of who I was. And so it took, unfortunately, it took an awful long time to dislodge these ideas. So anyway, besides feeling guilty over how long it took, I shouldn't feel guilty over that either, but I do sometimes, because, Matt Dillahunty's right. Seth Andrews is right. We're not stupid people. People who are religious are not necessarily stupid people. There are many, many people who just have been so beaten up with this stuff that they acquiesce, and it becomes a part of them for the rest of their lives. So, yeah, my wife just mentioned it's like Stockholm Syndrome. In a sense, it is. So anyway, I just wanted to make this little video because it was something that I had a discussion with. I think actually these are the most dangerous scriptures in the Bible. I think they're probably worse than the she-bears that killed 42 children, worse than Moses telling the nation, the men of Israel who destroyed the Amalekites to keep the young girls so that they could use them for sex slaves, and all that other stuff that is awful in the Bible. I think these are actually the most subtle and the most dangerous things, because these are the scriptures upon which basic principles, basic Christian character, being Christian, I'm Christian, doing the Christian thing, are based on the Beattitudes. And they're really screwy once you take a deep look at them. Again, like I said, it was a real subtle lead-in, because there are some things that have some merit in there, and then he sneaks in this other stuff that just degrades your sense of self-esteem and beats you up. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Again, these are my opinions, but after 15 years in therapy, I picked up a few things. I've done a bit of reading to understand a little better about how the human mind works and how how things screw us up. And so anyway, you may not agree with me, but those are my opinions. I tell you, these were some of the most heated debates that my wife and I had for a long time. And turn the other cheek. If a man sues you for your shirt, give him your coat. Those were Christian principles, and my wife was absolutely right about them, and I couldn't have been more wrong. But that's why I think these things are so dangerous, because they force people into a behavior that's not natural. And it causes deep psychological harm. So anyway, this is Truth Seekers saying so long, and I wish you a good day.